The Walt Disney Company has been telling shareholders for over a year now that when they fired former CEO Bob Chapek and replaced him with the once and future CEO Bob Iger, that a primary focus of Bob Iger's job would be finding a successor to fill the role of CEO. Well, an incoming board member just let it slip that the succession process at Disney might not be as robust as it seems. Let's talk about that on That Park Place. I'm Jonas J. Campbell, an investigative reporter for That Park Place, where we talk about streaming, theme parks, entertainment, and video games. Today, we're talking about James P. Gorman, the CEO of Morgan Stanley and one of two incoming board nominees for the Walt Disney Company. There's been a long process at Morgan Stanley of finding their next CEO, and Gorman is set to step down at the end of this year, which is, of course, just a couple of days away. Here to help me dissect what was said is one of my favorite Disney shareholders. That would be Mexican Iron Man. Welcome to the show, Mike. How you doing this morning?
Very well, sir. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you here, and we're really jumping into this hot so that we can get into it quickly. I want to hear all about your day and your holidays, but for the moment, let's talk about this guy, James Gorman, who I like to call JP Gorman because, of course, the competition for Morgan Stanley is JP Morgan, because this whole thing needs to be as confusing as possible. Disney's potential proxy battle, no issue for incoming board member James Gorman. That doesn't bother me one little bit. This was the story that I was intending on covering here. And I love the fact that we've got an incoming board member for the Walt Disney Company that actually has some opinions, because most everyone has been silent. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not bothered one bit about this potential proxy battle. I don't care. Well, why should you? Number one, it's not your legacy up on the block like it is Bob Iger's. And number two, your company just made a ton of fees off of this Hulu Comcast deal. So why should you care? And number three, you're sitting on a stack of cash and you're not beholden to this company for your future net worth prosperity. So why should you care?
That's a very good point. And he's been planning succession at his company for a very long time.
Those are my 3 points about this statement here. Of course, he's going to say something like this. Of course, he doesn't. You know, he also knows that as someone who's coming from finance and Morgan Stanley, he looks around at the other board members and sees them and he thinks they're children. I assure you of that.
I wouldn't disagree with you. If we look at the board of the Walt Disney Company, right here, the longest term person at the company right now is, of course, Bob Iger, because Bob Iger has been there since 2005. I wouldn't be surprised to find that he was secretly there before then. Francis D'Souza, no, here it is. Mary Elena Lagomasino. She's the longest standing board member of the Walt Disney Company. That is not Bob Iger. So the thing that I wanted to point out here is we've got a couple clips from this interview with JP Gorman. And he does a pretty good job. And I just want to take the moment to give him the scrutiny that we would give Bob Iger. Now, that being said, I do have a lot of faith in this guy. He seems to be he seems to handle himself well. Let's just go to this first clip.
You are just coming off a succession process. What, to the extent, is going to inform you trying to help succession at Disney, which is going to become an important component of your board work there, that you've learned from this process?
Well, they're forming a succession committee, which I'll be joining, so I'll be able to.
Now, that was an interesting statement. Did you catch that at the end there? What
They'll
he
be
said?
forming a succession committee, which I'll be joining.
Yes, and he sounds so cool when he says it with that British accent, and it was almost like he was here in the room with us when you just did that, Mike. Let's focus again on that last sentence.
Well, they're forming a succession committee, which I'll be joining, so I'll be able to.
He said they're forming a succession committee. I was under the impression that when Bob Iger returned to the company, that in fact, his primary job was to find a successor, and therefore it was a main focus. In fact, if we go over to Yahoo Finance, Disney CEO Bob Iger will definitely step down. I'm not sharing my screen. Here we go. Disney CEO Bob Iger will definitely step down in 2026. Succession process robust. This one right here, New York Times Dealbook Summit, which this was end of November when he said the process is robust. What do you think he meant by robust if they are now forming a committee? Is that an aw shucks?
That's Bob Iger being robust.
I got to say, I think that there was no CEO succession process at this point.
I would say the CEO succession process has been a bust.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think anyone that was potentially a CEO, they looked at them and said, no. They looked at Dana Walden. They looked at Christine McCarthy, who has now exited the company. They might have even looked at, what was her name? LaTondra Newton, the jewelry salesperson, and she's left the company. Is there anyone else I'm missing right here that has now just said, nope, I'm out?
I don't know about that. I think the people that are inside the company are hanging around like a pack of wolves looking over a carcass of a wounded antelope on the Serengeti. Because every day that goes by, Bob Iger becomes more of a CEO wounded antelope carcass on the Serengeti in terms of his lackluster performance in movies, lackluster performance in Disney Plus, and the continued deterioration and lack of excitement around what's being offered at the theme parks. I think when he says, when the Morgan Stanley new board member says they are forming a committee, which I will join, who is they? You know who they is? They is the executive committee that consists of two people, Bob Iger and the chairman from that they brought, the chairman of the board that took over this past year.
Yep.
Those two people, Mark and Bob, right there, the executive committee, that is the they that he's referring to. They are forming a committee, and now this new guy is going to come on, and I'll bet you anything that the new CEO succession selection committee is going to consist of Mark Parker, Bob Iger, the Morgan Stanley guy, and a fourth person that'll be a lackey that'll go along with whatever the two or three of them convince the rest of the board to do, because the rest of the board members are all from companies. Frankly, let's be real. They're all from companies that are either startups or they've been around for a while and they've gotten funding from a company like Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter over the years. And that's why this new board member from Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, looks at them all as children. They're children, not just in terms of how long they've been on a board, any board, including the Disney board. They're inexperienced board members, and the Morgan Stanley guy knows that. So he looks at them as children from that regard. And frankly, being that he's from Morgan Stanley, he also looks at them as children financially, because all of them, one way or the other, have been with companies that either they've been at or they're in an industry space that he's been funding or his institution has been funding for decades, to the tunes of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in finding financing or offering financing. So he looks at these people. He's walking in like a big dog, walking into a room of children in a kindergarten.
And I think rightly so. I think you're absolutely correct, and I agree with you. And I think he's probably earned that right after his long tenure at Morgan Stanley. I think it's funny that they call this a committee because you have the guy in charge of the committee and the guy that the committee is supposed to be in charge of. And it's like saying I was jumped by a gang when it was two people. It's like, yes, it is technically the smallest number that you could officially have and have a gang. This is hilarious to call two people a committee when one of them is the guy in charge and the other guy is the guy that was put in place by the guy in charge.
Oh, don't worry. I'm quite sure that they will add in addition to the Morgan Stanley Dean Witter guy, they will add another person, a fourth member, maybe even a fifth. But those people will be lackeys that will have no meaningful contribution except to act like they're doing something and go along with whatever the story is that they're given.
Right. I would love to see some non-unanimous decisions out of this group.
No.
So, let's go the Nelson Peltz comment just so we get the tone on it. Here's that.
I don't start as a director until February.
Right.
But
yeah, right in the middle of a potential proxy fight, by the way.
That's all right. You know, I've had a lot of battles in my life. That doesn't bother me one little bit.
I like that because he's not combative there. It's just we can do that. We can handle that. I like that. You know,
the other reason that I forgot to mention earlier when I said the reason, because he is from Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, he carries a lot of gravitas. He can pick up the phone and he thinks he's going to be able to say, Nelson, Chop, Booby, I don't understand what all this fuss is about. We must get on the same page and all ships must sail in the same direction. And we're going to have new leadership. Nelson, and I'm quite confident that when the robust process is over, we can all agree that the company will go in the same direction that it really should go for shareholder value.
Man, I love that. And I agree with you. This is a big change from the statements that came out from, I'm going to say they were Bob Iger statements. It was the board robustly defending Bob Iger and getting all catty and defensive over the fact that Nelson Peltz came in, and they're like, no, Bob Iger saved my life one time. He is the greatest CEO in the history of the world, and in fact, he saved a puppy last week. The statement, what I'm saying here is the statements that came out of the Walt Disney Company when they would dare challenge the legacy of Bob Iger, they did not come from a place of strength. They came from a place of weakness and defensiveness. So the last one that I want to point out here is J.P. Gorman's succession process at Morgan Stanley. And lest everyone think that I am being completely negative on the Walt Disney Company, I want to end on this one, because they've brought in somebody who knows how to handle a succession process.
I'm not on the board, so I have no wisdom or insight into it, but I have an enormous amount of experience having run succession here with our board. And I think we landed the plane really well with 3 great candidates, and then one of whom became CEO and 2 stayed as co-presidents.
Yeah, that's the surprising part, I think, for some, that the 2 stayed.
If we can just compare that to the Walt Disney Company and what has gone on there. First of all, you have one man who has been the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, and then one man who was a sock puppet of the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. And the moment that he was not a sock puppet, they started the process to fire him, that being Bob Chapek, out of the company. It's almost comical to list out all of the people who were thought to be the next CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Mike, do you have any thoughts on this long list of people that could have been the CEO, and if any of them might end up being the future CEO of the Walt Disney Company?
I don't know who would have been a good CEO of this company. I really don't.
I'll throw some names at you
All right,
while
go.
you're thinking. First of all, we've got Kevin Mayer, who just was the signatory or whatever on the merging of Disney's India business with Reliant. So they've semi given up in that area. There's Dana Walden, who is the head of the television division.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. And I think she's on the short list, so that terrifies
Yeah,
me.
well, you know, she's a chick, and, you know, whatever. I'm not going to say the rest of the line, but you know where I'm going with that. Next.
Yeah, there's Alan Bergman, who is the head of the movie business, but not doing so hot these days. There's Jay Rasulo.
Alan Bergman doesn't have the vitality or the institutional gravitas within Disney in order to become CEO. Next.
Right. If it were only a movie business, I might say Alan Bergman. But Jay Rasulo, who was the former CFO of the company,
Christine McCarthy, he has zero shot at getting the job.
Yeah. Christine McCarthy obviously exited, and she would have to reverse course on the current narrative on why she left the company.
I believe many times former CFOs make awful new CEOs. There are a handful of opportunities where that has not been the case. But overall, if you look at where companies have done this, CFOs typically are not the best CEOs for companies unless they're in a certain situation like, you know, BK is imminent. What we need is a CEO that's going to revitalize bring out the core of what once made Disney great, and have the passion and creative commitment to be able to navigate, almost like an explorer, if you will. We need someone to harvest Disney gold and, you know, to lead us to prosperity.
So let me ask you then about probably the most controversial but might fit. What do you think about Tom Staggs?
I don't know enough about him to render an opinion. I am in shock that, at least at this point in time, I'm in shock that, you know, that brings up an interesting point. Maybe, yeah, he probably would be on the short list, especially, isn't he a consultant right now?
Yes, he is. He's a consultant along with Kevin Mayer. Apparently, they were brought in separately, even though they are co-CEOs of Candle Media. I do see a world in which Disney goes ahead and does make that one final purchase for Candle Media in order to.
I'll tell you what does bother me about Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, about this guy being on the board. He has no idea how to run any of these 3 businesses, and I think it would be better to have someone on the selection committee that knows.
Yeah,
you know, these guys are worried about perception and how they look on camera and how they look to Wall Street, but they're not worried about whether or not this company is actually going to make money and make its customers happy.
Yep. Now, before we wrap up here, which I don't want to keep you too long, Mike, do you have any final thoughts? And do you want to tell people where they can find you? We say that, but of course, Mike is not a YouTuber.
Not a YouTuber.
But you can find him here on That Park Place whenever I am so lucky. Of course, sometimes he appears on the Pro Show, and he's also a fixture of Midnight's Edge. He keeps that place running. His spirit hovers over the water of Midnight's Edge. So I want to say, of course, thank you very much to everyone who watched to the end of this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Has Disney been caught with their hand in the cookie jar here with this comment? Or was this just a slip of the tongue by Mr. James P. Gorman? You tell us, because we would love to know what you're thinking. Like this video if you like this video. If you know someone who is as interested as we are in this sort of deep dive into all these Wall Street comments on an entertainment company, then maybe you should share this link with them. And of course, please consider subscribing to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.